Hello, everybody out there, wherever you might be watching. This is David Rovix with another episode of Discussions, which I broadcast more or less on a regular basis on weekday mornings at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And it goes out on various platforms, including the Facebook pages of Kboo Community Radio and Popular Resistance, and my YouTube channel, youtube.com/drovix, where it gets turned into an archive, and also in audio form if you look for This Week with David Rovix, wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, there's the little non-commercial announcement. And I'm very happy to be spending the hour with an amazing filmmaker, director of a documentary series, which is ongoing, called State of Injustice, about the horrifically brutal and racist state of the various Ohio police departments. And couldn't be more relevant subject. And with no further ado, let me just bring on Roger Glenn Hill, who is an award-winning filmmaker, and I think that is the best short bio to have on your just award-winning film. And if you want to know the details, you can like look into it. But I love just cut to the chase. And this documentary series is absolutely incredible. It's devastating. It's really hard to watch, as it should be, because this is about reality. But
Right.
I guess I was I'm just I want to talk about the documentary, but it's also like a subject material a lot of people are already swamped in constantly, and there's constant police. There's been so many police killings over the past week. I mean,
Yeah.
this guy in Mario who was killed in Alameda, California, same method as George Floyd. The police and all the body cam stuff's just coming out. It's constant. But this stuff doesn't usually make the light of day. I mean, there's so many other cases that I happen to know about just in the past 2 weeks that are not making national news, and
Right.
and I'm just wondering, first of all, just like going to the I mean, I know you have a GoFundMe going on for this, and it's not that well funded as far as I can tell. And like, how did you just even getting this stuff out there in any way is very difficult, I'm sure. But I wanted to actually back up even further, what got you at first interested in trying to do work around highlighting police brutality and police racism and violence in the first place?
Thanks. So this is kind of a jump off from a documentary I made a while back, which is called Struggle, which is currently playing on Means TV. I don't know if your audience knows about Means.tv. It's kind of like an anti-capitalist Netflix. It's a subscription-based platform.
Wow.
It is pretty cool. And they've got a couple of my titles on there. So Struggle was about the election rigging and mass voter suppression in the 2004 presidential election in the key swing state of Ohio, which swung the whole election from John Kerry to George W. Bush. And in that election, there were all kinds of shenanigans that went down, from voter suppression, purging the voter rolls in predominantly African American districts, and even evidence of ballot box stuffing and ballot manipulation, which did not get hardly any mainstream attention. Uh, so that was kind of my baptism into corruption in the state of Ohio at pretty high level. Um,
And did this also involve there was now in a small plane crash in Ohio, I believe, involving somebody who had a lot of information about that. Am I thinking of the right
that
the
is not something I'm privy to.
that's not
Yeah.
there was something about the voter purging of voter rolls, and one of those companies. Now I don't remember the name of the guy who died in the small plane crash, but he was just about to testify in D.C. At
Mm.
a major hearing around issues related to that. I believe it's the 2000 election. Now I'm fuzzy on the details, but this is reliable information. I'm not. This isn't coming from some conspiracy source.
No,
Anyway, I can't remember the details, so it sounds very bad. But
there
anyway,
there was
Ohio was related, definitely related to Ohio. But yeah,
yeah. I
what do
mean,
you got?
there was a overwhelming amount of evidence. So there's a lot of stuff that I covered in that documentary, but then there's also a lot of stuff that didn't make it into it because it was just death by a thousand cuts
Right.
in that particular election. But anyway, so that was sort of how I got started, and then I
Exposing state corruption.
right,
Ohio state
exactly,
corruption.
exactly. And then I moved to San Francisco for 12 years. I've done consistently done some documentary stuff. I co-directed a movie called Flying Paper, which is about uh, youth in the Gaza Strip who set the world record for flying the most kites at once. And then I've done some other been involved in some other short films from Gaza and from Palestine. And then I moved to Cleveland a few years ago. And it's been good because I'm back kind of, I feel like where I belong.
Mm-hmm.
As far as, I'm not in that bubble of the Bay Area anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I have like my boots on the ground as far as, getting involved in exposing these issues of corruption and police brutality. So my partner on this project, Brian Douglas, and I were approached by Black Lives Matter Cleveland, and they asked if we could do a video about the killing of Luke Stewart, which is the jumping off point for State of Injustice.
Episode 1.
Episode 1, correct. So this is all in the episode, but basically Luke was sleeping in his car, and two Euclid police officers didn't identify themselves for once, but it was dark and they had like blinding light flashing in the car.
This
And
is
the
the town
way
of Euclid.
Euclid, Ohio, it's a suburb of Cleveland, northeast suburb of Cleveland. It's a historically white suburb, but now it's actually majority black. However, the police force, the politicians, is overwhelmingly white, and it had a reputation I knew before going into this project as a racist town, but it's just like written into the language of like the town charter is like, we punish black people here. It's just so bad, and the police are so aggressive. Like you'll see this in several episodes where they just run up on black people, and without any like warning or anything. So Luke was sleeping in his car. Two cops ran up on him. One of them opened the door, put him in a chokehold, tried to drag him out of the car, while another cop got into the car and tried to put himself in the car and tried to push Luke out. So Luke panicked, as one could understand, and drove off. While the officer was still in the car, he tased him. He was punching him. He was beating him. He never said anything like stop or, it was all just aggressive. And he's driving the car, and he actually hadn't committed any crime because sleeping in a parked car is not a crime. But that's how they are.
But being black and sleeping in a car is apparently a crime, basically, in Euclid and a lot of other places, isn't it? That's
yeah,
clearly the case.
clearly the double standard exists for black people,
And
especially in
then,
Euclid.
are there? I was curious when I was watching this. It seems like in Euclid, anyway, they just are the police are really exclusively targeting the black population. Because I
Yes,
mean, like around here, if you look, if you're poor and if you're sleeping in a car that's run down, that's grounds for harassment. Whereas if you're sleeping in a nice car and you're white, you're going to be invisible, right? But
right.
it seems like the Euclid police are also going after black people of all walks of life. It seems. Is that the case from your, or they especially targeting, particularly or exclusively targeting people who are poor or living in their cars and that sort of situation?
Uh, the divide in Euclid is basically black and white. Now there are, more affluent black people who I think are more established in the community and the political realm and stuff. So I can't speak to their experience per se. But the general attitude towards Black people is that they need to be, harassed, and there's no place in Euclid that one can be Black and not be targeted. So in our documentary, we cover not just Luke's case, but we a lot of cases. So there's two other high profile beatings of Richard Hubbard, who was pulled over for not stopping at the stop bar at a red light, which the police were advised to not even pull people over for that, because I didn't even know that was a thing. I thought the stop bar was just like a recommendation, but like,
right? They
I
always
didn't know
invent
it
these
was,
new infractions which only apply to Black and brown people, right?
Right,
So
exactly.
many killings like that here too.
And so that officer pulled him out, had him come out of the car, and just immediately started beating him. He immediately starts kicking him in the crotch, throws him down. His partner tases him, and he just gets on top of him and just starts beating him. Another man, Lamar Wright, was just sitting in his car making a phone call, parked in somebody's driveway, and the cops just roll up. You can see the whole encounters. They actually have body cam footage for this one. And within like 3 seconds, they're like, turns the car off, and they just starts tasing him. Lamar was wearing a colostomy bag. They didn't bother to even they didn't wait long enough to even realize that this man was just out of the hospital. Another woman, Shawan Gray, was listening to music too loud, I guess, in her apartment. And they didn't even let her get her clothes on. Like, she was just wearing a wrap, and they dragged her out and arrested her. This was covered. This will be in an upcoming episode, but this was covered in the podcast Serial. Aramis Spencer was in his apartment complex, knocking on his friend's door because he's going to hang out with his friend. And Amiot, the cop who beat Richard Hubbard, and another cop were working as security guards. They weren't even working as police. And ostensibly, they checked him for a weapon, found a little bit of marijuana, threw him on the ground, kicked him in the head, tased him. And another girl, 16-year-old, had a run-in with Amiot and in the library, and he threw her down and cuffed her. You hear kids screaming in the background and stuff. So this guy Amiot is an absolute cancer on the community. They tried to fire him,
and he actually didn't he? Was he one of the ones who won an award in one of those episodes of the documentary?
No, that was a different terrible cop.
Okay.
But this guy, they tried to fire him, and he got his job back through binding arbitration, through the police union contracts with the city. So even when they are moved to finally try to fire someone, which takes a lot, they get their job back. So 3 officers that I know of have been fired from the Euclid Police Department. One was Amiot, got his job back, is still out on patrol. The other guy is this guy, Don Ivory, who I think you're referencing. He was given a top cop award. And then shortly after that, he admitted to domestic violence. And they tried to fire him, and he got his job back too. Well, excuse me. Fast forward to 3 months ago, or less, 2 months ago, Don Ivory was arrested for the attempted rape of a 13-year-old. So this is the quality of policing that exists in Euclid. The third officer who got fired, he started a fight with Hell's Angels at a bar, pulled out his gun, has a bunch of other DUIs and reckless behavior with the gun while drunk. So he got fired. And then last year, he came to the lobby of the police station and killed himself. So the officers that are running around Euclid are just, in my opinion, completely out of control.
Completely.
And these are the 3 that, they tried, that they actually were so bad that they moved to fire. But there's plenty of others. The officer that killed Luke Stewart was never fired. Matthew Rhodes. He shot Luke 5 times. He only remembers shooting 3 times, but he shot him 5 times. He was back on patrol within 5 days of the incident, and is still on patrol.
And this is all completely standard kind of stuff that you're depicting, which is what's so horrific about it, right? And I know that anybody listening to this, especially any black or brown people anywhere in this country, can recount similar stories from police departments all over this country because they all have cops like these ones that you're describing,
Right.
and they all have, or almost all of them pretty much have police chiefs and other cops that will cover up for the kind of behavior that you're talking about, whether it's exhibited by a minority or a majority of police on a given in a given department. Right, this kind of behavior is totally normal and covered up all over the country. Right, and they're talking about, like, I mean, I'm getting emails from my friends all over the world over the past few days who are asking me if things have changed in the United States after the trial of Derek Chauvin, and which is obviously just a completely ridiculous question to anybody who's paying any attention. But of course, outside of the United States, they get their news in drips, and just like we get news of other countries. It only hits when it's like really big news, and then all the other stuff is kind of. But and then here in the U.S., I mean, as most of us don't hear about the 99.9%, but much more than that, of all these incidents, and even the most egregious incidents of people killing unarmed, cops killing unarmed black people. It's like this just happened in DeKalb, Georgia, a couple weeks ago. A guy was shot through his door by police, through his front door, and they say he was holding a knife. Like, so what if he was holding a knife? He's inside his apartment. So,
Right.
I mean, this kind of stuff is happening constantly, and that was not even one of the cases that they mentioned on NPR yesterday when they said there were 3 protests in different cities where there had been recent police killings, and that wasn't one of them, and neither was Portland. And they were talking about 3 other cities, Knoxville being
Yeah.
one of them, where some horrible brutality just happened, just not far to the south of you there in Ohio.
I think that is part of the role of State of Injustice, is to highlight lesser known instances of police killings and police brutality. So in Cleveland, we have Tamir Rice, 12-year-old who was shot within 5 seconds while he was playing on the playground. And that has received national attention, but I think there's something like 92 or 93 Black people who've been killed by the police in the city of Cleveland in the last, 10 or 20 years. But it's an epidemic. And right, you're right. It's not just the major ones that receive national attention. That this is happening all the time.
How do you manage to get the documentary made, and where is it going to get shown? Because I mean, that's the thing that, like, people hear about this stuff when it hits the news, and something hitting the news is some kind of a mysterious process for most people. How that happens, and maybe sometimes, of course, it happens because tens of thousands of people are retweeting something, but other times it happens because folks like you are spending years and massive amounts of time and massive amounts of money to try to put a documentary together that somehow or other might manage to get some kind of exposure, and then it's so-called hits the news, or
Right.
how hard is it to get this kind of information, this kind of documentary actually seen by people?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. We've self-funded. We donated a lot of time. We're running the Indiegogo campaign. It was successful. The small campaign is like six grand or something like that.
If you're if you're making it on a volunteer basis and donating your time, basically,
yeah, I
that's
mean,
the definition of success here.
yeah,
I
basically,
assume,
um,
that
donating a ton of time. Some of the editing is, compensated at a reduced rate, just so that we have, we can free up more hours to so that each episode doesn't take 6 months to make.
Yeah.
So The Indiegogo was good. I mean, it's still like it's still active. So if people want to go to stateofinjustice.com, it'll take you there and you can watch the first two episodes. And if you're so inclined, you can make a donation. We have a call on Thursday with the Real News Network. They're out of Baltimore. They're going to air the first four episodes. So that's exciting. And we've been in discussions again with Means TV to go up on their platform as well. So it's very grassroots, but we're starting to build. The audience is building, and like when we launched the campaign, I think like we had like 10 followers on Twitter and about the same on Facebook and stuff. So it started very soft, soft launch. But yeah, people are discovering it every day. Hopefully, people watching this will discover it as well and share it with their friends and everything. So yeah.
I mean, what just strikes me though is, I mean, yeah, it's getting out there and certainly you're getting views, but like when you look at the number of, on the Facebook page, I mean, it's just, we hear about these videos of brutality that go viral on Twitter, and in actuality, that is a tiny minority of the actual stuff that, I mean, including, really well edited documentaries like yours. I mean, it's, yeah, it's quite a situation with the sort of information vacuum. It seems, and I,
Right.
I'm skipping ahead here, but I know, but this, obviously the documentary you're doing here, the series is obviously so relevant all over the country, and is it your impression, either there in Ohio or all over the country, that the police are on sort of a bit more intense rampage against black and brown people than they were on before Biden was elected? It just seems like it's stepped up, like they're for whatever combination of reasons. And do you think that's just an impression, or do you get the impression that's actually happening? Or
I don't think it makes a difference at all. I think it was the same with Trump. It's the same with Biden. It's the same. What maybe is different with Biden is that the stories don't get elevated as much. People with a liberal Democrat, not liberal is, but with a Democrat in office, people tend to go back to sleep. Whereas with Trump in office, every day, people were just really engaged with the news and everything like that. So I think maybe there's a perception, but as far as like police behavior, I don't think it's changed at all. I think what has changed is a greater prevalence of video, obviously. So a lot of the stuff that never would have gotten attention is now getting recognized. Uh, we shared the police report that they filed about George Floyd, and if you read it, it's like 3 paragraphs, and it's just the most bland. It's like
yeah,
a man died from a medical emergency while being detained by the police.
and incidentally, the killing of this man Mario in Alameda, California, the report from the police reads identically to the one from George Floyd.
There's another situation that I'm privy to. This isn't in the documentary, but this man Alex Rios was killed in the Richland, Ohio jail, and the coroner listed cause of death as excited delirium. He was beat for like 8 minutes by corrections officers, tased, and they actually had a guy like standing on his chest, and he died like 2 days later. And the coroner put excited delirium as the cause of death, and this is all on video too. I mean, that actually is on YouTube, even though nobody knows about it. So yeah, I mean, it's when you really start peeling back the layers. I mean, it's really dark, and it's really scary.
Because the
What's going on?
reality is that you know that most of these police reports are bullshit, and you know that most of the people being sent to prison for are being sent to prison on false claims by police. They're being railroaded. They're not getting proper defense, and the police are coming up with false evidence, like this guy in Baltimore who's now being, they're looking at it. But that people like that guy, that forensics guy in Baltimore, they're all over the place, and this
Right.
is we have no idea how many people in our prisons are there for any actual crimes. Yeah.
And then, which is also going back to episode one, when Luke Stewart was killed. Um, there's community outrage, obviously, and at the city council meetings, the common refrain was like, "This is being investigated by an outside agency. The wheels of justice are spinning." But it's the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. It's just a cop clearinghouse. Like
Yeah.
and we listened. We included, for the first time, I think, anywhere, the audio of that investigation, snippets of the audio.
Mm.
And they never ask why questions. They just, they don't ask Rhodes, why did you jump into the car? Why did you tase him when he was driving? They never ask any of those questions. It's very obvious that it's just, they're on the same side. They're on the same team. And I think that doesn't get much recognition when you hear someone say there's an outside independent agency. Well, okay, but that agency's whole purpose is to clear cops of criminal charges. So
I never heard anybody questioning that outside agency phenomenon until just at least on like sort of national corporate news networks. I never heard anybody even questioning that phenomenon until just the past couple weeks.
you're right.
And also the grand jury phenomenon, which is another one that generally just gets sort of
Right.
put out there like as if it were a jury trial, as if there weren't a difference. I mean, they rarely, for whatever reasons, they rarely explain what a grand jury is, and why they almost always side with the prosecution.
Right. And basically a grand jury, 9 times out of 10 is going to send it to trial. It's not their job to decide if it's just, does this case have merit? And 99% of the time they decide the case has merit, except when a cop is involved, and then suddenly it doesn't even get past that initial stage. So Euclid is it's a mess. I mean, it seems like the cops that flame out of other departments end up in Euclid.
Right.
I mean, I could go on and on with examples of like how corrupt the police are. And then there's just like, there's nowhere for Black teenagers to hang out in Euclid. Like they're trying really hard to shut down the roller rink, the independent business that, caters to young Black people. I mean, not just young people, it's all ages, but there was an incident 2 years ago where they're having a lock-in for, high schoolers, like what you do at the YMCA or something, where, you lock in for the night. And the capacity for the rink was like 400 people. The rink tried to get police to offer security, but they didn't show up. Anyway, so the rink still had like 150 people left before they reached, max occupancy. And the police showed up and they just announced to the crowd that they're only letting in like 100 more people or something like that. There's like 200 or 300 people outside. So kids started pushing to get to the front, and a fight breaks out. Well, the police used that as justification to try out all their new riot gear, and they pepper sprayed and tear gassed and just sent these kids like screaming into the streets. A lot of these kids get like dropped off by their parents. They don't have anywhere to go. So, and then the pepper spray like wafted into the building. So now all those people had to come out too. So the police created this riot, as they call it, and now are using this incident as a pretense to shut down the ring. They've been trying to shut it down for years. They just had the owner just had to appear in court a couple weeks ago. So we're waiting for the verdict about that. They're closing down like all of the pools, basically.
It just sounds like running a prison. And
Yeah,
what's
exactly.
the end goal here? once they take away everybody's possibilities for any kind of public space or anybody to gather in any safe public.
It's moronic. I mean, it's like these kids have nowhere to go. So what are they going to do? Like,
And there are so many towns like you described. I
yeah,
mean, that's just another thing that just needs to be said for anybody that has traveled around this country. The towns like Euclid are everywhere.
yeah,
These sad, poor towns with no public space and vicious racist cops. But the the city council meeting where the cops were getting that award, I mean, it was just,
right,
I mean, what was so striking to me about it was everything that wasn't said. I mean, just the atmosphere, the tense atmosphere. All these cops who just like, it's like everybody in the room knows the reality, including the cops themselves. Like that they're all just
yeah,
playing this farcical little game where they're pretending to respect these politicians that they really detest, and that
yeah,
these politicians are giving them awards that they know they don't deserve. They know it's a bunch of racist thugs, and I mean it just felt like all that was so clearly right beneath the surface. Was that your do you think you kind of set that up in the way you did the documentary, or was that the vibe that you got from the city
no,
council
no.
meeting?
I mean, me and Brian, we've watched hours and hours of city council meetings. So, like, yes, that is the vibe. And how tone deaf can you be? I mean, they just killed this guy. Like, his family was in the attendance because it was like the first council meeting after he was killed, or maybe the second one. But
So they're
basically,
giving the cops an award at the
yes,
same time that they're
all
supposed to be
all
apologizing to this family.
all white cops getting awards with the family in attendance watching this. And it gets even worse. The two officers involved in Loose Killing, Rhodes and Catalani, were also both they were included in the cops getting awards. Now, here's the thing. If you watch really carefully, they don't say Officer Rhodes. They say officer last name for every other cop, but they say Officer Matthew.
Hmm.
So they're trying to be clever, and like, oh, the family probably doesn't know the family did know who it was, and even the guy like that was given the awards like tripped up. He called him Officer Matthews because I guess he didn't get the memo that they're calling him the first name because he just murdered somebody. And but no, they went right ahead of it, and then people start complaining, and they're like, oh well, we have 14 agenda items to go before we'll get to the public comment section. So it's just they just don't care. They're irritated that they even have to like address these, even when the chief of
Yeah,
police
the chief
is
of
the
police,
biggest apologist for all of his
the
officers,
only one who
never.
was capable of trying to say something apologetic, and then the
Yeah,
best he
he
can do is
can't.
say, "I send my condolences." How can you send condolences? You're actually there in the same room, so like
Yeah,
sending condolences, that kind of implies like you're mailing something, like
he
speak to the
couldn't
person.
he couldn't even like get the apology out before
No.
like saying something shitty and intimidating. He's like, you don't know what's in my heart, so we can go back and forth and have that kind of thing. And then he's just like, I send my condolences. It's just like, oh my god, it's just I
Yeah.
I would be very happy when I don't have to hear the police chief's voice in my ears anymore, because the way like the
Roger, how
contempt
do
that
you
he
sleep at
has.
night? I mean, I just, I know this is, I don't want to make this about, I know it's about so much more than you, obviously, but just as a filmmaker working on this stuff, when I don't know, maybe I'm just like a weak person, but when I watched episode two, I felt physically sick for hours afterwards, just from watching a half hour of a documentary. And,
Yeah,
you know, I don't know, what's your survival mechanism doing this work?
I think I've just been doing it for 20 years. So basically, I mean, I still like it still affects me. Like it's not like it doesn't affect me, but me and Brian, like both of us are a little bit numb to it. Um, but every once in a while, like it can be a lot. and you know, I think because I've worked in Palestine and I've seen the most extreme human rights abuses possible in Gaza and then, you know, across
Yeah.
Israel, Palestine, that, you know, it's built up a bit of a wall in, you know, around my, you know, heart, I guess you could say. Um,
But
but
actually,
yeah,
when you
it's,
mention Palestine, though, not to change the subject from trauma, but that, or to stay with that subject, really, I mean, the comparisons. I mean, do you often find yourself occasionally wondering, oh, where am I now? Oh, more tear gas canisters with American
yeah,
flags on them. I could be anywhere. I mean, and
right,
then the police acting like an occupying army. I mean, the way the cops behave towards people that are of the criminal element in their minds, you know, which of course with the Israeli army is anybody who's Palestinian, and with the
right.
American police is anybody who's black, brown, or poor generally. I mean, it's there's a lot of similarities. Do you find? Do you find yourself going back and forth in your mind a lot?
Euclid feels like to be black in Euclid feels like to be Palestinian in the occupied territories. It's not that much different, you know. I mean, you're targeted, you're limited as to where you can go, um, you're harassed, imprisoned, beaten for no reason um, other than the color of your skin. So yeah, I mean, it's and a lot of cops are trained by Israeli forces. You know, I need to look into that and see if Euclid went through that. But Euclid did
Mm.
go through training with David Grossman, who the
Mm.
killology expert, which is going to be in the third episode. And his whole thing is he goes around to police, uh, does police trainings all around the country. Not so much anymore because he's a psychopath and he's finally been discredited. But he basically like his whole thing is to make people cops feel good about killing people. Like he says like it's not a big deal, and like I mean, it's just such a he's so gross. He's such a psycho. Like he one clip, which may or may not be in the episode. He's like, I go around, I talk to these cops, and they tell me, you know, like shoot out bad guys down. I'm okay. And what do? I go home and I have the best sex of my life. Like he's just, I mean, and this is like where the Euclid police shortly before the Luke Stewart killing, you know, were in that training. Um, so yeah, there's no real training as far as like de-escalation or like treating people with uh, basic dignity. The training in Ohio is a total joke, and this is going to be covered more. Uh, Huge percentage of Ohio police officers are actually not. They're in what is called cease function status because they haven't completed their training, but they're out there with, you know, patrolling with guns and stuff. But the Ohio Police Officer Training Academy basically just operates on a like they don't investigate anything. They just, you know, blind faith. They put faith that the officers are going to do the training, but they don't, or they make a total joke about it. Um, so that's another huge story that's being unearthed right now, which eventually will make its way into this series as well. So as we move out of Euclid and into, you know, issues more statewide, this is going to be a big thread that we cover.
Mm-hmm. You know, I remember, I used to play at a lot of college campuses, all over the country in the '90s, especially for whatever reason. I don't know. Apparently, the college circuit still exists. I hear some other people do it, but I don't know. I haven't gotten those gigs in a long time. But in the
Right.
'90s, I remember there was a guy in Ohio. Josh was his name, and I'm trying to remember his last name. But he was a student activist at the time, and then active around environmental stuff, I think, and then he was harassed by police in very bizarre and scary and interesting ways, and which also involved his van getting burnt down mysteriously by somebody. But he got pulled over on the highway and driving in between, two towns somewhere in Ohio. He got pulled over by cops who knew everything about him and his mother,
Mhm.
and were asking him all kinds of questions about where he had just been that they should have had no reason to know about. And I mean, they were targeting him, and what was so mysterious was that, I mean, to him and to most everybody else that he knew, was that he was just a student activist who wasn't doing anything particularly extraordinary or threatening, beyond exposing exposing bad corporate practices like people do when they're doing activism of various kinds. But the kind of consequences he was facing with the police were really quite something. And I wonder what kind of consequences you've encountered over the course of the time you've been exposing state corruption and police corruption in Ohio.
I'm just hoping for the best, to be honest. I've been arrested at protests and stuff like that, but I've not had. I've I had one really weird experience when I was covering the voter suppression testimonies in Columbus, and I mean, I guess I was a student activist at the time too. So I mean, I guess they might have had a dossier on me of some sort. I'm not sure, but I was in Columbus and I parked in a parking garage, and I went to the testimonies, and I came back and my car was stolen. There's just a pile of glass on the ground, and the thing, the bar was smashed through. So I'm like, okay, well, my car was stolen. That's weird. I mean, that sucks, but it happens. A couple weeks later go by, and I get a call from the parking lot, and they said, "We think we found a bunch of your stuff in the stairwell," because I was basically like living out of my car. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. So I go and I pick up a bunch of my stuff. It's just like strewn through the stairwell. I'm like, okay, well, that's weird. A year goes by, and I get a call from the police, and they say, "We've recovered your car. It was reported stolen, and it was returned to the parking garage that it was stolen from a year later, and the window was fixed."
What?
Yeah, it was the most bizarre thing. I have no, like, I don't know.
Some cop felt bad for breaking the window, or
I
like.
I don't know. I always wanted to like get it swept for bugs, or like a GPS tracker or something, because it's like in the aughts, It wasn't like, so I don't know. Anecdotally, it's just a weird thing that happened. Was it related? I can't say for 100% sure. But yeah.
And then doing all this exposure on this little town. I mean, Euclid. How many people live in Euclid? It's a small
It's like
city.
60,000.
Okay, quite a small
Yeah,
city. It was a city, but
small
still.
city, yeah.
I mean, this must be making waves. I mean, this is not a big city. This. I mean, this doesn't just disappear. This kind of footage that you're putting
I
out
think
there,
they've
it's getting
just
around.
mostly ignored it for the
Really.
most part. Yeah, I think we'll get more. I think that's just Euclid's MO, is to just ignore, 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 ignore. So we'll see. We're gonna start putting uh, like postcards around town and just try to drive more traffic and then this sort of thing. I mean, it's gotten press, like the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is the main newspaper of note here. They did a great article about the State of Injustice series and the
Okay.
issues plaguing Euclid. So that definitely got their attention. Cleveland Scene also did a good article about it. So they have to be aware of it, but we haven't heard any feedback or anything like that.
Hmm. And you got plans for what's coming up in terms of the project with this documentary project.
So we got episode 3 coming out soon, and this is more like um, kind of in that occupation, like Black people live under occupation in Euclid. Like it is in that theme, in that there's just nowhere you can be Black and not be targeted, even in your own home, even in the hallway of the apartment building. Kids in the park, because they just grab this kid out of for no reason and arrest him and knee him, and they love to knee in the crotch. They love to handcuff you and then knee you in the crotch. It seems to be like, I don't know why, but it's so that's in there. And then the whole saga with them trying to close down the roller rink as well. They just closed down the YMCA. They're, like I said, they're closing down the public pools. So there's just nowhere you can be without being targeted, and so that's going to really come through loud and clear. And then so that'll come out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then episode 4, we're going to start getting into the Ohio Police Officer Training Association and what a joke that has become. There's a woman, Mariah Crenshaw, who is incredible. Like, she's just a powerhouse, and she's been all over this non-compliance with training issues. And she and another Richard Montgomery, who's in the series, they're filed charges against Matthew Rhodes. So that's going to go to court. So there's a lot happening. And part 4 is going to be more like, this is how we're fighting back against the corruption and the violence that is perpetuated by the Euclid Police Department and the Euclid political body, at large.
This whole question of training, I mean, it's one of those many things that just seems so completely ridiculous. From the only people who have no concept of what's actually happening can talk about that, right? I mean, because it's like it's literally like saying you got this gang of fascists or Klansmen or whatever. I mean, and when it's not necessarily even an abstract statement to use terms like that. I mean, when we look at, like, I mean, I know, the term fascist could be arguable whether we're talking, when we're talking about the members of the right or, explicitly racist people like that, but in some countries, like I return to this often because I think it's so notable. In 2012, when in Greece, when Golden Dawn, the fascist party, was polling at 7% in the elections, and now they're illegal, so they're not polling out anything. But at the time, they were not yet found to be a criminal organization, and they were polling at 7%. But among police, and because they vote according to their workplace, not according to their residence in Greece, and so it was very easy to see that the police, how they vote, 50% of the police were voting for Golden Dawn. And I think that's not, that tells you a lot about the mentality of not just the Greek police, but I think, a whole lot of police in a whole lot of different countries.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this, I mean, so this question of training, like so many of the proposals for doing something about these gangs of racist killers that we call the cops. I mean, this is it's just so completely ridiculous. The idea of training, of course, you're not going to train your way out of this situation. They are who they are, right? But what are people trying to do that's to address the situation that's not just pissing in the wind?
Well, the training that Euclid does, they do a lot of training on weapons and
so there's
violence. Yeah, that's the training that they do. The training about like de-escalation, that's the stuff they blow off, and they don't.
Like
and they
implicit
don't
bias.
Yeah, implicit bias, all of that's just made a total joke. And then again, this is in the doc series, how much of a joke Euclid has made the training in the defensive tactics, excessive force. In the excessive force training, the defensive tactics chapter of that training, they open with a meme of like a stick figure with a cop hat and somebody on the ground, and says, "Protecting and serving the poop out of you." And they included a Chris Rock video, one of his older things, where it's like how not to get your ass kicked by police. I mean, they just made a total joke about the training. And it just illustrates like how like messed up the culture is there. And I'm sure this is plaguing departments all over the state and all over the country. Um, but and then with the mandatory trainings for, as far as like you said, implicit bias, and it's a plaguing Ohio is that all thousands and thousands of officers are not in compliance because they don't do the trainings, or they just log in. I mean, like, you see like, oh, this training was started at 12:01 and finished at 12:03 p.m. You know what I mean? It's just it's a total joke. So no, like, you're not going to train your way out of it, but at the same time, the training that is designed to, make police less brutal is ignored, and the training, firearms and all that stuff is what's emphasized.
Yeah. Roger, you were mentioning before that you lived in California in the Bay Area for 12 years, and I'm just a little curious on a little more thoughts on the Bay Area and why you talk about it as a bubble. Because I mean, I lived there for a long time, and I know what you mean in the bubble sense, that in terms of like. It might have. I mean, San Francisco, at least for a long time, was sort of one of the main poles of the left in the U.S. and left organizations. If they existed and they were based somewhere, it was their main base was going to be in New York or San Francisco. So, I mean, there's this history to the place, but at the same time, it feels kind of like. At the same time as it feels like a bubble, it also feels like ground zero in so many ways uh, in terms of predatory racist policing, as well as in terms of the crisis, the housing crisis, which is so badly affecting, especially a poor black and brown people in California.
Right.
I wondered if you just have any more thoughts on the situation there in the bubble.
Well, yeah, I lived in San Francisco, and yeah, I it's more just for me. I felt isolated there. I didn't feel like I personally was connected to a movement. So that could just be where I was at in my life, versus where I am now, where I feel like, you know, I think you need like a certain amount of credibility in San Francisco, which I didn't necessarily need to get active here. Um, it's a tough question because you're right. Like it's become basically like a neoliberal hellscape in San Francisco,
Yeah.
and in the predatory, housing market, and the police. I mean, the security guard was eating a burrito in the Mission, which is historically like the Latino neighborhood, and he was shot and killed by police after a white person called the cops on him. So there's plenty of issues with policing in San Francisco that are not dissimilar to the issues in Ohio. I think it's just, for me personally, I wasn't plugged in the same way that I am now.
And I know I'm skipping in terribly jagged ways that have nothing to do with a good arc for an interview. So I apologize to everybody who has been advising me, come on, come doing the good arc and stop skipping around. But in Gaza, I'm just thinking, like, I'm just wondering if the work you've done in Palestine, and then when you put out any kind of content that's about stuff going on there, compared to when you're trying to put out content about police brutality in Ohio, how different or similar is the response that you get from like the media that is maybe picking up on or not picking up on the work you're doing, and sort of amplifying that or not?
I think it's very similar, actually. I think the apologists for Israel are very similar to the apologists for the police. The apologists for the Israeli military that oppresses and kills and beats and detains and arrests arbitrarily and detains people without charge and puts children in jail. I mean, if you can if you can somehow apologize for the behavior of the Israeli military, that feels very similar to the people that wave the Blue Lives Matter flag and apologize and make excuses for the occupying police armies here in the United States. So it's not dissimilar.
Not dissimilar in that dynamic, but I guess I don't mean to ask silly leading questions, but just like my experience singing in front of singing in front of the wall in Belaine in the West Bank at a protest. Uh, I mean, I think I was on like three major Arabic TV networks, just because I showed up with a guitar, which is not what happens when you play at a protest in the United States generally.
Right.
The TV networks don't show up. They don't cover the protests at all. If there's anybody with a camera at a protest in Portland, you can be sure it's an independent filmmaker on volunteer time, 90% of the time.
Yeah, that's true. Press TV is going to be there. Other outlets like that. So I think you said it. I mean, but at the same time, like those news reports don't permeate the minds of Jewish Israelis. That this is more broadcast in the surrounding area. It doesn't break the consciousness of.
So in that way, it's like the same dynamic, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Except, I guess what's different, I would propose possibly, is that when you're exposing Israeli war crimes, there's more potential support for your work from like the Arabic press compared to when you're exposing police crimes in the United States, where there is not that kind of sort of state presses from countries like other countries that are interested in covering that stuff as much, right? I mean, I don't know. There's some good work on domestic, and maybe most of the good work on domestic in terms of big networks that's on what's happening in the United States with police brutality is happening on foreign networks like Al Jazeera. I don't know if that. I mean, in terms of networks, like in terms of paid work,
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Just
I
conjecture. It's not.
I agree. Yeah, getting the message out is
it's a challenge.
it's a big challenge. But I will say this: the message, when it does get out, has the potential to totally like change somebody's perspective.
Right.
So it's a quality over quantity sort of thing, I guess.
Have you seen that personally in some particular instance where something goes viral and then really affects the discourse?
I was back in the day when I was working on Struggle. Struggle also covers police violence at protests. It opens with like an undercover cop who's clearly undercover being arrested, in quotes, all to just like stir up the crowd and give them a pretense to run in and arrest people and pepper spray or whatever. And it was showing this at a coffee shop, and this teenage girl, she approaches me and she was like blown away, right? And she didn't have any money, so I just gave her a DVD. I didn't care. So she comes back and she gives me like $20, and she's like, finally, I can like prove to my parents that I'm not crazy, with my beliefs that the system is messed up. And like, just because this was even before like YouTube and stuff. So it was not an easy time to have those thoughts validated. So that was a a moment that sticks out in my mind, and other ones where I've gotten feedback from people like, you totally changed, or this film, this video, whatever, totally changed the way that I think about these things. So because we don't have editors. I mean like, we don't have like an editor, we're not trying to like finesse this to get it onto like ABC or the local news and stuff, where you have to like be like artful about it. It's like, no, this is the truth as we see it, raw. And if you want to like debate it, like we're ready to debate it, but
here's the footage.
Here it is, so
Yeah.
I haven't had anybody try to like explain to us why we're wrong, because I think it's easier for them to just ignore us.
Yeah, that's generally true, isn't it?
Yeah.
Roger, it's just been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us for the hour.
Thank you, David. I want to leave you with this memory. When I was a student at Ohio University, we actually brought you in to play at an anti-war rally, and I didn't know who you were at the time. Well, I knew who you were by reputation, but I didn't know what you looked like. And you were like setting up the soundboard, and I like approached you and I was like, "Hey, do you know what you're doing? Do you need any help?" And you like looked at me like I was insane. Like,
Aww.
Yeah, kid, I know what I'm doing. That was funny though. I was like, okay. Maybe I should.
Sorry for that look.
No. It's funny. It's a funny memory that I have. So, but yeah, so it's good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for all you're doing, Roger.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
And thanks everybody for tuning into this discussion with Roger Glenn Hill. And you should really check out State of Injustice, the documentary series funded on Indiegogo, and go to stateofinjustice.com and check that out. And I'll be back on Friday to talk with Ron Placone, I believe. Same time, same channels. And you can find this all archived in podcast form if you look for This Week with David Rovics, wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, remember, don't pay the rent unless you really have to. Trust your neighbors. Mutual aid will get us through. Bye for now.